Ron, and open the vehicle yourself and keep your hands visible. You already know what you're looking for.
This operation had been in the works for nearly a year. Ronan Quist, a senior narcotics detective with 16 years on the Helmsford Police Department, walked right into it, and the serialized bills in his car would make his defense impossible.
We know exactly which serial numbers belong inside that car. Those bills weren't supposed to be traceable.
He would not get the chance to talk his way out of this one. Within 24 hours, investigators would pull a bundle of pre-counted $100 bills from beneath the spare tire of his personal Ford F-150, every serial number already logged into a federal evidence file before he ever touched them. 16 years on the Helmsford Police Department, 7 years on the Narcotics Investigations Unit, 40-plus seizures. $1.3 million skimmed before the count ever happened. The defendants who said money was missing had been called liars for years. They were telling the truth the entire time. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something. Have you ever wondered who counts the cash when police pull it out of a stash house? Who is in the room? Who is watching? Drop a comment with what you think the answer should be, then watch how it actually works in this case. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. We cover accountability cases the local news quietly buries every single week. Ronan Quist was born in Helmsford, New York in 1977, the second of 3 children in a working-class family on the east side of the city. His father, Walter Quist, was a Helmsford police patrol sergeant who retired with 28 years on the job and a back that never fully recovered from a 1991 foot pursuit through the Eastview rail yards. His mother, Eileen, worked the front desk at a dental practice on Garrison Avenue for 19 years. The family lived in a 2-story vinyl-sided house on Pelham Street, 3 blocks from the Catholic elementary school where Ronan and his sisters were enrolled the moment they turned 5. Friends and relatives interviewed years later described the household in the same way every time. Cop family, cop dinners, cop calendar on the refrigerator. Walter brought the job home in the small ways: the shoe polish on Sunday nights, the duty belt hung on a specific peg in the mudroom, the radio chatter that drifted in from the cruiser whenever he stopped by the house mid-shift. Ronan was the one who paid attention. He played hockey through middle school as a defenseman on a parish team that practiced before sunrise at the Helmsford Civic Ice Center. His report cards described him in language teachers would later remember almost verbatim: respectful, dependable, occasionally too quiet, strong work ethic, slow to volunteer, but solid when called on. He graduated from Helmsford Catholic High School in 1995 with a B average, a varsity letter, and no real plan beyond following his father into the department. He spent 2 years at the local community college, taking criminal justice courses and working part-time at a hardware store on Route 9 for $7.25 an hour. In 1997, he applied to the Helmsford Police Department. He passed the written, passed the physical, and was accepted into the Academy class of 1998 at the Capital Region Law Enforcement Training Center. 21 weeks of academy training. A starting salary of $34,000. A badge number in the 4,000s. His father pinned the badge to his uniform himself at the graduation ceremony at the State Armory, in a photograph that would later be entered into evidence at his federal sentencing. His first assignment was the night patrol shift in the city's 3rd precinct, working a beat that covered the Eastview neighborhood and the warehouse district along the river. His field training officer, a 22-year veteran named Carl Reinhold, wrote in his 90-day evaluation, "Officer Quist is methodical, observant, and uncommonly comfortable in tense encounters. We'll make a fine detective if he stays the course." That evaluation went into his personnel file. So did the next 11 evaluations, every one of them a variation on the same theme: reliable, professional, calm under pressure, promising. He made patrol officer 2nd class in 2001. He made patrol officer 1st class in 2004. He was assigned to the Street Crimes Unit in 2006 and to the Detective Bureau as a junior investigator in 2009, working property crimes out of the 2nd Precinct. He married Lauren Halverson, a labor and delivery nurse at St. Bartholomew's Hospital in the summer of 2007. They bought a 4-bedroom colonial on Cedar Ridge Drive in 2010 with help from her parents on the down payment. Their son Cole was born in 2011. Their daughter Hayden was born in 2013. By every external measure, Ronan Quist was the version of a cop the department wanted on the recruiting brochures. He coached his son's youth hockey team on weekends. He coordinated the Helmsford Police Benevolent Association's Christmas toy drive for 3 years running. He spoke at his old high school's career day every spring. He kept his father's old patrol cap on a shelf in the home office above his desk. And he kept his mouth shut about the things he saw at work because that was what serious cops did. He had a reputation in the department for being the detective who never gossiped, who never brought department drama into the briefing room, who could be trusted with the things you did not say out loud. In 2018, after a competitive internal selection process, he was promoted to senior detective and transferred to the Narcotics Investigations Unit at police headquarters downtown. His lieutenant at the time, Marcus Pellegrino, called him exactly the kind of investigator we need in narcotics. Detail-oriented, discreet, and absolutely unflappable around large quantities of seized property. That memo would be cited in the federal indictment 7 years later, in a section the prosecutor described to the jury as the moment the department put the keys to the vault in the wrong man's hand. To understand what Ronan Quist did, you have to understand the room he was standing in when he did it. The Helmsford Police Department's Narcotics Investigations Unit operates out of a converted office wing on the 3rd floor of police headquarters at 200 Whitcomb Boulevard. The unit at the time of the events in this case consisted of 1 lieutenant, 2 sergeants, and 9 detectives. Their work product on paper was straightforward: long-term narcotics investigations, confidential informant management, controlled buys, surveillance operations, the execution of search warrants on stash houses, vehicles, and the residences of suspected mid-level traffickers across the city and the surrounding county. The department's written policy on the seizure of currency at a search warrant scene was not complicated. It also was not the policy that was followed in practice. On paper, 2 sworn officers were required to be present at the moment cash was bagged on scene, both initialing the seizure tag, both signing the chain of custody log. On paper, the cash was supposed to be bundled, sealed, transported to headquarters in a secured evidence container, and counted at the evidence intake counter in the presence of an intake clerk and a second witnessing officer. On paper, the amount entered into the case file was the amount counted at intake, and the amount counted at intake was the amount that had been recovered from the scene. In practice, the unit ran thin. Most nights, 2 or 3 detectives split warrant duties across multiple addresses. Most nights, the partner who was supposed to witness the on-scene seizure was at another door, on another floor, controlling another subject, processing another piece of evidence. Most nights, Ronan Quist found himself alone in a bedroom closet or a kitchen pantry or the open trunk of a Cadillac, holding a paper grocery bag or a plastic shoebox full of rubber-banded bundles of 20s and 100s, with no one in the room and no count yet on the books. The seized cash at that moment was, in the most literal sense, an unknown quantity. The defendants whose property it was had been removed in handcuffs, often before they had any opportunity to see what was being recovered, often after a violent stack on a fortified door, often in a state of fear that does not produce reliable accounting. The amount they would later claim had been in the house was their word, and their word, in court, was the word of a person facing federal narcotics charges. It would be checked against the booked amount on the seizure report. The booked amount on the seizure report was the amount Ronan Quist wrote down. This is the structural blind spot that defined the entire case. Drug seizure cash sits at the exact intersection of 2 facts that protect a dishonest cop almost perfectly. The first fact is that nobody on the defense side has credibility, because the people whose money is being counted have, by definition, just been arrested for selling narcotics. The second fact is that there is no independent count to compare the booked amount against, because the cash was uncounted when it came out of the wall, the safe, the duffel bag, the freezer, the spare tire well, Whatever the cop writes down is the count. There is no shadow ledger. There is no second source. Quist understood this completely. He had worked seizure scenes for nearly a decade. He had seen the way defense attorneys raised the question. My client says there was more in that house. And he had seen the way judges and juries dismissed the question almost reflexively. He had stood at the intake counter and watched cash bundles he had brought in get counted, recorded, and locked into the property vault. He knew which moments were witnessed. He knew which moments were not. Around 2020, he started taking advantage of the moments that were not. The first known skim occurred on the evening of February 11th, 2020, at a single-family rental house on Lindell Avenue in the Eastview district. The target was a mid-level cocaine distributor who had been under investigation for 14 months. The search warrant was executed at 7:42 p.m. by a 6-officer entry team. Quist's assignment that night was secondary scene processing, specifically the master bedroom and the attic crawlspace. In the attic, behind a panel of pink fiberglass insulation, he recovered a black duffel bag containing what he later estimated on the scene to be roughly $64,000 in U.S. currency, mostly hundreds, some 50s, bound in rubber-banded bundles of approximately $10,000 each. There was no count witness in the attic. The other detectives were 2 floors down, securing the basement and the garage. The exterior perimeter team was outside. Quist removed 2 bundles, approximately $20,000. He pushed them into the inside pocket of his tactical vest, zipped the vest, and continued processing the bag. He carried the duffel down the attic stairs, photographed it next to a scale ruler on the kitchen floor, sealed it into a tamper-evident evidence bag, and signed the chain of custody tag. He drove the bag back to headquarters himself. The intake count came in at $43,610. The defendant, 3 weeks later through his attorney, would claim there had been at least $60,000 in the attic. The claim was noted in the case file and dismissed at the suppression hearing as the self-serving estimate of an interested party. The $20,000 in Ronan Quist's vest went home that night in the inside pocket of his department-issued duty jacket. It sat in the bottom drawer of the gun safe in his basement for 17 days while he thought about what he had just done. Then, beginning on the 18th day, he started moving it. The method he developed over the following 5 years was patient, deliberate, and built around a single principle. Never deposit a single sum of cash that would trigger a currency transaction report under federal banking regulations. The threshold was $10,000 in a single business day, in a single institution, into a single account. Quist's deposits were calibrated to stay well underneath. 8,400, 6,900, 9,200, always in multiple banks, always across multiple days, always rotated through 3 personal checking accounts, a credit union savings account in his wife's name that she rarely reviewed, and the small business account of his brother-in-law's home renovation company, into which the cash entered as ostensible payments for construction work that was never actually performed. He was disciplined about the skim itself. Internal records would later show that he never took more than approximately 30% of any individual seizure, and on most large seizures, he took closer to 15 or 20. The percentages were calibrated against the range of error that a defendant's later memory could plausibly cover. If a stash house contained an amount the dealer himself was uncertain about, the dealer's later claim could be plausibly explained away as overestimation. If a vehicle stop produced cash, a passenger had never even seen counted. The passenger had no credibility at all. Quist learned which seizures were safe to skim from and which ones were not, and he stayed almost entirely in the safe column. The escalation came in the volume, not the percentage. In 2020, he was involved in 7 warrant executions that produced significant currency seizures. In 2021, he was involved in 9. In 2022, he was involved in 11, including 1 stash house raid that produced over $400,000 in seized cash, and from which Quist removed approximately $72,000 before the formal count. In 2023, he was involved in 14. By 2024, the year before everything ended, the Helmsford Narcotics Investigations Unit had become one of the most productive in the region in terms of seized currency, and Detective Ronan Quist had personally processed the on-scene count, or its absence, on more than 2/3 of every dollar that came in. The signs were there. They were just easy to miss if you were not looking. The Quist family vacationed in St. John in 2021 and Tuscany in 2022. The Colonial on Cedar Ridge Drive received a $42,000 kitchen renovation in 2021 and an $18,000 backyard pool installation in 2023. A 1969 Chevelle Supersport, partially restored and worth somewhere north of $60,000 on a clean title, appeared in the third bay of the garage in 2022 and was registered, on paper, as a gift from Quist's late uncle's estate, which contained no such vehicle. The Quist's youngest child began at a private day school in 2023 at a tuition cost of $26,000 a year. None of this looked impossible for a senior detective with a working spouse and a paid-off mortgage. It looked tight, but it looked plausible. Lauren Quist, according to her later sworn statement, never asked. She had grown up in a household where her father, a hospital administrator, simply produced the family's money. She assumed her husband did the same. The lieutenant of the Narcotics Investigations Unit, Marcus Pellegrino, would later tell investigators that Quist was the last detective in his unit he would ever have suspected. He was on time. He was thorough. His paperwork was clean. He never complained about overtime. He volunteered for the warrant rotations no one else wanted. He was, in Pellegrino's words, the guy I trusted to be alone in a room with $100,000 and the door closed, because if I couldn't trust him with that, I couldn't trust anyone. That was, of course, the entire problem. The complaints had been arriving for years. A post-arrest complaint from a defendant about missing seized property is, in a department the size of Helmsford's, an almost daily occurrence. The complaints are logged. They are reviewed by the Internal Affairs Bureau in batches. The vast majority of them are dismissed in the ordinary course of business, because the vast majority of them are, in fact, attempts by defendants to muddy the evidentiary water in their own cases. The institutional default is to disbelieve them. The Internal Affairs Bureau at Helmsford PD is a small unit, 4 investigators, 1 lieutenant, 1 captain. They sit on the 5th floor of headquarters in a section of the building that most patrol officers walk past their entire careers without ever entering. Sometime in late 2023, an internal affairs sergeant named Diana Holcomb began noticing that the post-arrest cash discrepancy complaints arriving in her queue were clustering. They were not evenly distributed across the Narcotics Investigations Unit's 9 detectives. They were concentrated on a single name. Roughly 70% of the cash discrepancy complaints from narcotics arrests over the prior 18 months involved seizures where Detective Ronan Quist had been the lead on-scene officer responsible for currency intake. Holcomb pulled the complaint logs going back to 2020. The pattern was visible, not enormous in any individual case, not so obvious that a casual review would catch it, but over 4 years, consistent. Quist's seizures generated complaints. Other detectives' seizures generally did not. She took the analysis up to her captain. The captain took it up to the deputy commissioner of the department, a former federal prosecutor named Adelaide Roosh, who had been brought in 2 years earlier, specifically to professionalize the department's internal affairs and integrity functions. Rausch had, independently, already noted something about Ronan Quist. She had been at the department's annual awards banquet the previous October. She had seen Detective Quist arrive in a Navy 3-piece suit that did not look like the suit of a man pulling down a senior detective's salary. She had filed the observation in the back of her mind. When Holcomb brought her the complaint cluster, the observation came back to the front. The investigation that opened in February of 2024 was small, slow, and almost entirely paper-based for its first 10 months. Subpoenas to banks. Subpoenas to credit card processors. Subpoenas to title companies. Records on the Cedar Ridge mortgage refinance. Records on the Chevelle's purchase chain. records on the brother-in-law's home renovation company, which had filed no employer withholding for 3 years, and which had, on closer inspection, no actual customers other than payments routed in from Ronan Quist's checking accounts. The forensic accounting picture took until Thanksgiving of 2024 to fully assemble, and when it did, it pointed almost unmistakably at exactly what Quist had been doing. But it pointed at it the way circumstantial evidence does: strong, persuasive, not airtight. The Internal Affairs Bureau and the federal task force coordinating with them decided they needed something a defense attorney would not be able to talk a jury out of. They needed a closed loop. They needed a scene where the amount in the room was known precisely, in advance, to people Quist did not know were watching. They decided to give him one. The operation was scheduled for January 22nd, 2025. A controlled residence in the city's Northgate district was set up to appear as a mid-level cocaine and currency stash, with cooperating actors playing the role of mid-level distributors, and with currency provided by a federal joint task force account. Every bill in that currency, before it ever entered the residence, was photographed front and back. Every serial number was logged into a sealed federal evidence file. The total was counted 4 separate times by 4 separate auditors. The pre-planted amount in the residence was exactly $241,320. The warrant was assigned, through ordinary unit rotation, to Detective Ronan Quist. At 4:51 p.m. on January 22nd, 2025, the entry team breached the front door of the Northgate residence. The cooperating actors inside complied immediately. The scene was secured within 90 seconds. By 5:14 p.m., Detective Quist was alone in the master bedroom of the house with a black nylon duffel bag containing $241,320 in pre-counted serialized U.S. currency. He was in the room for approximately 11 minutes. The other members of the entry team were processing the kitchen, the garage, and the basement. There were no other officers on the second floor. There was, however, a covert audio-video recording device placed inside the bedroom by Internal Affairs 48 hours before the operation. The device recorded Detective Quist opening the duffel bag, examining the contents, removing 5 bundles, and placing them into the interior pocket of his department tactical vest. It recorded the sound of the vest zipper being closed. It recorded him standing in the room for an additional 80 seconds, looking, by every available indication on the video, at nothing in particular. It recorded him exhaling once, picking up the duffel, and leaving the bedroom. The intake count at headquarters that evening came in at $187,320, a shortfall of exactly $54,000 relative to the pre-counted total. 5 bundles of $10,000 and 1 bundle of $4,000. Internal Affairs already knew, to the bill, which serial numbers were missing from the count. The search warrant for Detective Quist's residence, his department-issued vehicle, and his personal Ford F-150 was signed by a state judge at 9:47 a.m. the following morning. It was executed at 1:30 p.m., while Quist was at headquarters on a scheduled administrative day. Investigators found nothing in the house, nothing in the department vehicle, and, in the spare tire well of the F-150 in the driveway, a black nylon zippered pouch containing 5 bundles of pre-counted, serialized $100 bills bound in the exact $10,000 increments Internal Affairs had prepared, plus $4,000 additional dollars in 50s. Every serial number matched. The forensic accounting that had already been assembled was then layered onto the controlled scene evidence. Investigators identified 114 separate sub-$10,000 cash deposits across Quist's personal accounts, the credit union account in his wife's name, and his brother-in-law's home renovation business account, occurring in a temporal pattern that correlated, in case after case, with the dates of Helmsford Narcotics Investigations Unit warrant executions over the preceding 60 months. The estimated total skimmed, based on the deposit pattern alone, was approximately $1,300,000. The brother-in-law, a 41-year-old contractor named Eric Halverson, was approached on the morning of January 24th. He cooperated within 90 minutes of being read his rights. He produced a notebook, kept in a kitchen drawer at his own home, in which he had recorded, for his own tax protection purposes, the dates and amounts of every cash deposit Quist had ever asked him to run through the company account. The notebook covered 38 separate transactions over 4 years. It would become Exhibit 47 at trial. Text messages recovered from Quist's phone were sparse but damning. Most of his communication with Halverson about the deposits had been verbal, but 3 exchanges had been preserved. Halverson, August 14th, 2022. Need you to slow down for a couple weeks. Bank is asking about the volume. Yeah, copy. We'll hold off till after Labor Day. Halverson, March 2nd, 2023. How much this round? Same as last. Spread it like before. Halverson, November 9th, 2024. Are we okay? My CPA flagged the deposit pattern. We are fine. Tell him it's draws against a private investor. I'll get you a paper trail. There was no paper trail. There never had been. The internal affairs investigators who reviewed the complaint logs going back to 2020 then went through the more painful exercise. They contacted the defendants whose seizure cases had generated cash discrepancy complaints. They contacted them in prison, in halfway houses, in probation offices, in living rooms. They explained that there was now reason to believe the defendants' original complaints about missing seized currency had been accurate. They explained that the lead investigator on those seizures had been arrested. They explained that affected convictions would be re-examined by the district attorney's conviction integrity unit. 43 separate narcotics cases were eventually identified as having involved a Quist on-scene cash seizure with a contemporaneous defendant discrepancy complaint. Of those, 11 were eventually vacated. Several others were renegotiated at the post-conviction level. The collateral damage to the Helmsford Police Department's narcotics caseload, to its reputation, to its ongoing investigations, to its relationships with the district attorney's office and the federal task force, was, in the words of one career prosecutor, the largest single officer integrity event this department has had in 40 years. We are about to walk into the moment they came for him. Before we do, if you are still here, you already know this channel covers cases nobody else will touch in this much detail. Subscribe and turn on the bell. The next case in the queue is worse than this one, and you do not want to miss it. They did not arrest him at his house. They did not arrest him at a traffic stop. They arrested him at police headquarters on the 3rd floor, in the conference room of the Narcotics Investigations Unit he had worked in for 7 years. The meeting was put on his calendar by Lieutenant Marcus Pellegrino at 8:14 a.m. on January 24th, 2025, 2 days after the Northgate operation. The subject line read, Case Debrief, Northgate. Quist arrived at the conference room at 10 a.m., carrying a black ballistic nylon case folder and a paper coffee cup. The lieutenant was not in the room. The captain of internal affairs was. So were 2 New York State Police investigators. So was a special agent from the FBI's Albany field office assigned to the Joint Task Force. The body cam footage that opened this video begins at exactly that moment. The internal affairs captain spoke first. Detective Quist, please have a seat. We need to talk about the intake count from the Northgate warrant on Wednesday evening. Okay, sure. What about it? The amount you booked was $187,320. Is that consistent with your memory of the count? Yes, that was the amount on scene. Detective, the actual amount in that residence at the moment you began processing was $241,320. We know that because we put it there. Every bill in the residence was pre-counted and serialized by federal investigators before